Hello, the next set of videos that you're about to see are going to introduce you to genetics and how we look the way we look and why the way we look the way we look based on our parents and our DNA. So there are a couple of topics we'll cover. We'll cover the basics, then how to do a Punnett square, the chromosome theory of inheritance, which is just one step beyond basic genetics, and then pedigree. So how do we see a family tree of traits? So let's start off with an introduction to genetics. So this guy in the corner was Gregor Mendel. And so we defined that genetics happens because all body cells are diploid, meaning they have two copies, one for mom, one for dad, from dad. We talked about diploid and haploid a lot when we talked about meiosis. So diploid means that it has two copies, haploid means it has one copy. So at the end of meiosis, we have mom's egg, dad's sperm combined together to make all of your body cells. So Gregor Mendel, this gentleman in the corner, was an Austrian monk, and he worked with pea plants in the garden. And so during the time of Gregor Mendel, people were well versed in lots and lots and lots of fields of study. So he was a mathematician, he was a biologist, he was all of these different things. And while he was working in the garden of the monastery, he noticed some trends with the pea plants. So he started to do a whole lot of experiments and just tracking the statistics, and he noticed some common numbers in how he was tracking what pea plants looked like. And as a result of this, he became what we call the father of genetics. So Mendelian genetics laid the foundation for a series of discoveries. There are three laws that we're going to discuss, two of which today and then the other one later. But the first is the law of segregation, then the law of dominance, then the law of independent assortment. So we're going to hit on segregation and dominance today. We're not going to talk about the law of independent assortment until a little bit later. So the law of segregation means that you get one gamete, or each gamete receives one of the two alleles the parents carry in random fashion. Let's put that in some more simplistic terms. So each egg cell, that's a synonym for gamete, sex cell, receives one of the two alleles that a parent carries in a random fashion. So let's define this word allele. So an allele is a form of a trait. It is a type of the trait. So we have a trait called hair color. There are multiple different forms of the trait for hair color. But let's just consider that there are two forms, black hair and blonde hair. Those are two different forms of the same trait. We're still talking about hair color, we're just talking about two different types. So the law of segregation says each gamete, each egg cell is going to receive one of the two alleles that a parent carries, because parents are diploid, but when they make their gametes, they're haploid. So let's look at this. So during fertilization, each parent organism is going to give one copy of the allele to the offspring, and it's completely random how it happens. So they're going to give either the black hair trait or the blonde hair trait to their offspring. So here's a picture to kind of show you how this works in the framework of meiosis. So on the left-hand side, you see the mom. Just a quick side note, we always represent a female like a circle on top of a plus sign, and we always represent a male like a circle with an arrow out to the right. So you'll see that scattered throughout your activities for this unit. So make sure you know that circle with the plus is female, circle with the arrow is male. But let's look at the mom side of this meiosis. So she goes through all of the stages of meiosis and goes through all of the PMAT, and then she's divided into two new cells, and this picture leaves out she would go through PMAT again, and have 4 unique gamete cells. Well, we already knew that because we know meiosis. So each of the gamete cells has a different copy of the trait A, and we didn't define the trait A. So this one received a capital A, a lowercase a, and a capital A. The same thing happened with Dad. He went through PMAT once, he goes through PMAT again, and all 4 of his gametes have different letter A's in them. That's what the law of segregation is. There were 2 copies in the original cell. Each gamete received 1 copy in a totally random fashion. Okay, to the law of dominance now. So the law of dominance states that some alleles are dominant and some are recessive. Pretty easy to remember since the title of the law is law of dominance. But what does that mean? So an organism that has a dominant allele shows the dominant trait. So let's say black hair overpowers blonde hair in the example we were using earlier. If you have 1 copy of the allele for black hair, that's the trait you're going to show. A recessive trait, or an organism with a recessive trait, has 2 recessive alleles. In order to show the recessive trait, you cannot have any of the dominant alleles. So let's look at that in letters. It might make a little more sense. So this bunny rabbit with the black fur on the left could be capital B, or capital B, lowercase b. We designate the dominant trait to have the capital letter, and we always write capital letters first. Just like at the beginning of a sentence, you always write the capital letter at the beginning of a sentence. So capital letters always go first. So the bunny rabbit on the left, he shows the black fur trait, so he could be big B, or big B, little b. But the bunny rabbit on the right doesn't show the dominant trait, so he's got to be little b, little b. So he can't have any capital letters to show that trait. So there are 2 other words that we use to describe dominance and recessiveness. Homozygous and heterozygous. The prefix homo means the same. The prefix hetero means different. So homozygous is 2 of the same letter. Heterozygous means 2 different letters. And that's not like A, B, A, C. No, we're talking capital lowercase when we talk about the letters. So a homozygous dominant trait is big B. A heterozygous trait is big B, little b. And a homozygous recessive trait are 2 identical recessive alleles, so little b, little b. So you're going to have a homozygous recessive is always going to show the recessive trait. It's going to show the dominant trait. And then the homozygous dominant is just 2 capital letters. Now I want to give you some synonyms here to help you as you begin to work through problems. Homozygous is the same thing as purebred. So if you hear of a purebred Shih Tzu, then that one would be homozygous for all of its traits. It could be homozygous dominant, it could be homozygous recessive. But purebred means homozygous. Hybrid means heterozygous. Okay, that's always going to be the case. Hybrid's heterozygous, homozygous is purebred.